for joining me today. My name is Crawford, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Ponte Vedra Beach Branch Library. And since we're right in the middle of summertime, I thought what better time than to dive into some summer romance, exploring different kinds of romance novels that maybe you've tried already, or maybe you've been thinking about trying, or maybe you just haven't ever considered before. Romance sometimes gets a bad rap for being nothing more than bodice rippers, although there's nothing wrong with bodice rippers, and certainly we'll touch on that area of romance a little later in the presentation. But romance really has a lot of different ways that it can be executed in different books. And that's a little bit what I'll be talking about today, as well as a wonderful website to use to find your next great romance author that you want to read, a read-alike, if you will, or really for any author, not just romance authors. And also at the end of the presentation, I'll have a list of some suggested titles based off these three kinds of romance novels that I'm going to talk about today, which of course by no means encompasses the genre. So if you have any suggestions for fellow readers of romance novels you really enjoyed, be sure to put them in the comments and share them with everybody else. Sometimes that's where you get some of your best recommendations, is when someone else says, you know, I really love this book and this is why, and then you give it a shot and you end up loving it too. So I thought, what better place to start with romance novels than how it all began with the grandmother of romance novels, the cornerstone, if you will, of the romance genre, which is, of course, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. That's just one sample of a romantic classic that has endured over the centuries and has inspired a lot of other books of a similar take, if you will, both in book format as well as with movies and TV shows. One specific example is Pride and Prejudice inspired Helen Fielding to write Bridget Jones's Diary, which has that same kind of trope going on where boy and girl meet and decide right off the bat, not for me, do not like, was the term, you know, swipes left. So it was really interesting to see how that format, that romantic comedy format, has endured over the centuries and has spun off different books and movies and things like that. So Jane Austen is just one of several authors that comes to mind when you think of romantic classics, and also a genre of maybe clean reads for romance, which means you want to read about the romance, you want to read about the love story, but maybe not in such intricate detail some of our racier romance reads, which will be coming up later in the presentation. So a good example of a more modern day clean read romance would be, for example, Jan Karen's Mitford series, as well as some of Nicholas Sparks's books. And of course, there's lots of really wonderful classic books that capture that love and feeling with maybe not quite so graphic a detail, if you will. So definitely books worth checking out, or maybe even rereading some of your favorites. So we've talked about some classic romance novels, some clean reads, if you will. And one of the other things I mentioned about the romance genre is sometimes it really can't be pinpointed down to just one thing. And the next book series that I'm going to talk about certainly represents that idea. In that I mean that sometimes, you know, you could have a suspense novel that has romance, or you could have a historical romance novel, or a time travel romance book, or any blending of genres like that, where, you know, it's kind of almost a hybrid. It's almost impossible to place in one specific area. And this is where libraries have a little bit of an advantage over bookstores. Bookstores tend to put their books together by genre, whereas libraries tend to put their books together by author. And we are no more fortunate for that fact than with Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series. Because if you've read Outlander, you know it's almost impossible to pin it down just to one genre. You could put it in historical fiction, you could put it in romance, you could put it over in the sci-fi section under time travel, and any number of other things. So it really does encompass all these different areas. And of course, Outlander fever is at a fever pitch right now because they're working on season 6 for the Starz adaptation, but more excitingly than that, The 9th book out of 10 has finally been announced that is coming out in November of 2021. So for those of you readers who've read books 1 through 8 and been eagerly awaiting that 9th book for like several years now, you finally have a date for that book. So I know there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be jumping on our wait list to get their hands on that copy of that book. So again, one of the themes that comes to mind with Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series is, of course, the time travel aspect, and we have other time travel romance books in our collection, which I'll be mentioning on my suggested reading list at the end, and a way to find more of these kinds of read-alikes on the literature map, which I'll touch on soon. Now, as you'll recall, earlier in this presentation, I mentioned something about those racier romance reads, those bodice rippers, if you will. And certainly they're very popular, especially now that Shondaland has adapted the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn, which is, of course, my next mention here. The book that was recently adapted was her very first title in that series, The Duke and I. And most of the time when a series is really popular, you'll eventually hear that they're renewing for another season. Well, the Bridgerton series was so popular on Netflix that they've announced that they're making all the way through series 4, most definitely. And they could be adapting all 9 of the books. Each one features one of the Bridgerton siblings, and then I think the last book is a prequel to all of the events in the Bridgerton series. So if Bridgerton was something that you watched last December and you loved it, we've got some suggested reads for that. So again, with romance, there's something for everyone. If you like your romance a little racy and spicy, then we've certainly got those books for you. If you prefer your romance novels a bit more chaste and restrained and clean and wholesome, we've got those kinds of books. And then of course, we also have our romance books that just fall into so many different genres. It can take you in so many different directions. So again, the Bridgerton series has kind of inspired those more racy bodice ripper type romance novels and gotten people more interested in that particular genre of book, which we certainly do have on our shelves and are ready to recommend to you. In terms of some areas of romance that I've discussed, I've talked about the clean reads, the classics, how it all began with Jane Austen, for example. I've talked about romance books that are almost impossible to pin down to one genre, like the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon, which features time travel and historical fiction and romance. And then, of course, the Bridgerton series, which has been around for a long time but has skyrocketed into popularity due to the Shondaland adaptation on Netflix last December, and now has several more seasons for fans to look forward to. And those are just 3 areas of the romance genre, by no means complete, nor will my suggested reading list here in a minute capture everything, but maybe give you a few ideas of some other romance books you might like to try, or maybe if you're kind of more of a newbie, so to speak, to romance, maybe to dabble in and see what you think. One of the things I wanted to mention, one of my favorite websites after being a librarian for 18 years, is the literature map. And you can Google the literature map if you want, or follow the link going along the bottom of today's presentation. And it's a really neat website. It's free, and all you have to do is type in an author that you enjoy. And it doesn't have to be limited to romance. I just wanted to mention it in terms of romance, finding that next romance novel that you would really enjoy, but you can really type in any author that you want. And then when you type in that author, their name is going to appear right there in the center of the screen. And all around their name will be other authors floating around their name that are considered read-alikes. And the closer an author's name is to the original author, the closer of a read-alike their books are to what you've been reading and enjoying. And some of the authors that are a little bit further out from the original author may still have some elements of things that you enjoy about the books. For example, with the Outlander series, it really depends on what aspect of the book you're enjoying. Did you enjoy the time travel? Did you enjoy the romance? Did you enjoy the history? And so it gives you lots of really interesting suggestions of other authors to try. And one of the things that may be reassuring is when you see this map, you may be looking around at some of the different authors and saying, hey, I've read some of those other books too, so you know that you're on the right track. And so that's a great way to open yourself up to some new books, some new series, so you never run out of good things to read. So I really encourage you to check out the literature map. Like I said, it's completely free. Anybody can access it. It's super simple to use, and it'll give you kind of a jumping off point of some other authors that you might enjoy, whether they're romance authors or any other genre that you enjoy reading. And be sure to stay tuned right after this segment to see my suggested reading list of some other books and series that you might be interested in. And remember, one of your best resources is your local library. Stop by our adult reference desk or the circulation desk and ask us about what great romance books we've been reading or any reader's advisory suggestions that we may have. We're here to help you find your next great read and to enjoy as many books as possible. And again, thank you so much for joining me today and diving into romance, whether you're someone who's read lots of romance novels, or maybe you're only just started in this genre, or maybe I'm hoping after today's presentation, you'll be willing to give it a shot because maybe it's not just all one kind of romance book that you were thinking, that there's a lot of different variety of things out there that you might enjoy. So thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.